This is a Sun Sparc Server 1000E. Got put in here at the university in January of 1996, which makes it about 21 years old. It's an ancient piece of history. The system looks absolutely complete, as in it's got everything. The data storage, the backup system, and the system unit itself. It's kind of here, and it kind of looks like it's part of a mini museum that maybe some enthusiast has put together and never thrown away. Looking at it, the specifications for it are it has 6 CPUs, 512 megabytes of memory, and 124 gigabytes of RAM. Each CPU probably runs somewhere around 75 to 85 megahertz, which is a long way short of a modern CPU. For example, your iPhone is doing more than two gigahertz. It has more than probably has 1 or 2 gigabytes of RAM, and depending on the storage, it's somewhere between 16 and 256 gigabytes. So storage is the only thing about this system that sort of kept pace. It had an enormous amount of storage for the time. This system still has the CD drive attached to it, and if I take a look at the CD, I can see that it's an Oracle Server Enterprise Edition, and it's designed for Sparc Solaris 2 point something, 2.x. So that's the system unit. Also attached is some tape backup units. They're attached using a SCSI bus. There's an exabyte Data 8 tape backup, 8mm tape backup unit. This one is the XL version, so it had 7 gigabytes of capacity per tape. And when they advertised these things back in the day, they would always say it was a 7/14, claiming that it actually had 14 gigabytes of capacity if you used compression. But that sort of implies that your data wasn't already compressed, and it was pretty optimistic. So if you just assumed you had 7 gigabytes of storage on a tape, you'd be fine. It had a 0.5 megabyte per second transfer rate. This model came out in 1994, which sort of fits with our 96 timeframe for this unit. Data rate peaked in 1999 with the Mammoth 2 model, which had a massive 60 gigs of capacity and a 12 megabytes per second transfer rate. Standing next to it is this DLT unit. This is a DLT 7000. It has 35 gigabytes of native capacity, so 35/70, and had a 5 megabytes 5 megabytes per second transfer rate. If you do the sums, you work out 35 gigs at 5 megabytes per second. It takes about 2 hours to fill the unit. Now, when you know that this system had 120 or so gigabytes of data storage, that means you're taking about 4 tapes, which will take you around 2 hours to fill. And that assumes that you write to the tape and you don't do a verify afterwards, which would have doubled the time it took. So 16 hours for a full backup, assuming someone's standing there to change the tape right at the time it needed to happen. DLT kept advancing through the times until it peaked in 2006 with the DLT S4 model, which had an 800 gigabytes native capacity and a transfer rate of around 60 megabytes per second. The unit has a disk array attached, so it's a Sun Sparc storage array. It's a pretty interesting unit. It's very hefty, big. This front cover actually just comes off. There's a button underneath at the front that you just push and give it a bit of a reef, and the front cover comes off. Once it's off, it reveals 3 handles, and also on the left hand side there's this little display thing here, and that's actually a fan unit. So you undo some screws and it'll slide out, and you can change your fan array. If you pull on the handle, it's kind of a big lever. It slides out, and then the unit can be pulled out. It goes about halfway, and then there's a metal release on the underside that you can press to get the unit out the whole way. If you look at this drawer, this is a drawer of 10 hard disk drive units. In this case, they're filled with 4 gigabyte Seagate drives, 10 of them, and there's 3 drawers, so 3 10s are 30 times 4 gigs is 120 gigs. Then that adds up to nearly the 124 gigs of storage. I presume the other 4 gigs actually is inside the system unit. The discs themselves, you can press the little latch and the lever will pop up, and then you lift the lever and it gently pries out the drive, and then you can lift the whole drive out cleanly. And that's how you would change a disk, I suppose. It's a great little unit. It weighs a ton. It looks pretty effective, and it's in very good condition. Interesting how this thing connects back to the system. It uses some optical connection. It's got optical fiber. I presume it's multi-mode, and it has large LC connectors on each end. I've no idea what method it's using to transfer data across that link. Interestingly, this had a micro Sparc 2 controller, which isn't that much less powerful than the Super Sparc CPU in the main machine. Okay, looking at the back of the server itself, you can see that it has 3 of these cards on it. Now, each one, if you take a look inside, and we will, it's basically a 2 CPU motherboard. And there's 2 CPUs on each motherboard, and there's 3 of them, so that's where we get 6 total Super Sparc CPUs. You can see on the board there's a stack of RAM here, and there's the CPU card, and you can also see there's an add-in card for a SCSI controller, and there seems to be basically one for each of these CPU cards, and on 2 of them, and then on the third CPU card, the add-in card is actually for the storage. In that format, I don't know. Getting users to access this machine would be through those Ethernet ports. I guess there's one for each of these CPU cards. Those are only 100 megabit cards, so it only goes 100 megabit Ethernet. Not particularly fast. Transferring 124 gigabytes over 100 megabit Ethernet takes quite some time. That's about it for this system. A really interesting piece of history, really. 21 years old, which is ancient in terms of computing. Fascinating. I'm sure absolutely top notch for its era, but today completely blown away by pretty much a mid-range telephone that you carry around in your pocket and don't even use very much. But that's the nature of computing. I hope you enjoyed this little review.